Okay, so just starting with introduction, I think we'll let each of the speaker speak for a few minutes about themselves, about their last education, how that led to their interest in consulting, and how that lead to their current role, and what do they do in the current role. And I will introduce each speakers briefly, and they will go into the 3 minutes of describing that. Okay, so I think we'll just go with the order of the poster. So we'll start with Jeff. And Jeff is currently a senior associate in Magnolia Innovation, a boutique life science consulting company in Hoboken, New Jersey, which is right next to New York. And he was born and raised in Hong Kong and got his bachelor's degree in international business and urban planning from University of California, San Diego. The one fun fact about Jeff is that he once went into a jazz concert with the Uber driver who he met a week before. So maybe we'll hear a little about that too. But Jeff, if you can tell us a little about Jeff, you have a Bachelor of Science background and how that leads to your interest in consulting and how you land in your current role, that would be great. Thanks,
Yeah,
Jeff.
Thanks, Quan. Jeff here. I actually, my background is probably a little different to the other two because I didn't actually come from, my bachelor's degree isn't actually a Bachelor of Science degree. It's a Bachelor of Arts degree in business and also in urban planning. And so when I, close to my graduation, I was always thinking of, I really wanted to get into consulting because I knew that I'm going to learn a lot of good skills. I'm going to work with a lot of smart people. And so I went around looking for consulting companies, and this was the one that I found that most suited my my career path. And so I started working in Magnolia right after my undergraduate degree, which was just a few years ago, and I've been in the same company for about I think 2.5 years. Started off as an associate. Now I'm a senior associate, and I do a lot of work. I do a lot of market research work, so maybe a little different to I guess you guys would call it clinical research or medical research. Market research is basically just you want to understand what it's like in the market. You want to understand how physicians are treating these patients, for example, in the real world. Or even patients, how are they experiencing a particular condition, things like that. So we do a lot of qualitative and quantitative work, and we work with pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, and helping them with their various needs, which I can obviously go into in more detail in a second. Did I cover what else? What else should I talk about?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good as a start, and we'll go more into the jobs.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, and so next we'll move on to Bhavna Murali, and Bhavna is a senior associate consultant in oncology and specialty therapeutics team at Kantar. And prior to joining Kantar, Bhavna got her PhD from molecular cell biology from Washington University in St. Louis, where she was actually my PhD classmates, or I guess upper class. And her research was in the field already in translational cancer biology with the focus on novel therapeutics targeting the tumor microenvironment. And the quarantine has bring Bhavna an interesting throwback because she has learned Indian classical music for 10 years and she's getting back to it during this quarantine. And that's the fun fact about her. I don't know if Bhavna will play for us, but Bhavna, please introduce yourself. Thanks.
Thanks, Quan. And yeah, good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here. As Quan just mentioned, I'm Bhavna Murli. I currently work with Kantar Health. I'm an associate consultant on their oncology and specialty therapeutics team. So Kantar Health is a very unique consulting. It turned out to be a very unique consulting opportunity for me because it was the perfect marriage of my two interests, which is cancer biology, or I should say oncology and consulting. But I don't know, as many of you may have started grad school thinking about, a path in academia. I did too. When I first started at WashU, I was in the program of molecular cell biology. I was thinking that I wanted to be a PI. And soon after a couple of years of research, realized that that's maybe not the path that I'm most passionate about. So I started looking at other opportunities, did a little bit of pro bono consulting work in the St. Louis area. I'm happy to go into that in a little bit more detail later. And then ended up finding this opportunity of doing oncology work in a way that was most authentic to me, which was the business side of oncology. And that's how I found Kantar Health, which actually used to have a St. Louis office. And I'm currently based out of the New York Kantar Health office, though. Well, currently based out of home, as you can see, but I'm in New York. Kantar Health is also very similar to what Jeff just explained that Magnolia does. Kantar Health is also a market research firm. We also do strategic consulting work for pharma and small to mid-sized biotech. Pretty much our clients are in any stage of the product life cycle, and we help them with several different questions. Again, we can go into that in a little bit more detail in a bit. But yeah, I've been with Kantar since May of 2019, and our company is actually actively recruiting right now. So I'm happy to talk about any part of the process. And also, if you want to reach out to me after the call, I'm happy to connect. So yeah, happy to be here. And thanks, Kwan, for the invite.
Thank you, Bhavna. So next on, we'll move on to Stephen. And Stephen Chung is a senior analyst at Health Advances, a life science strategy consulting firm with practice areas across biopharmaceuticals, medical devices, diagnostics, and digital health. As a strategy consultant, Stephen has helped his client to make high-stake commercial and strategic decisions such as commercialization strategy, R&D prioritization, and commercial due diligence. Stephen received his PhD in biological engineering from MIT. So aside from our New York camp, Stephen is our Boston camp here, but he has lived in South Africa for 3.5 years before actually coming to the US for undergrad. And so with that, Stephen, if you can provide a little detail about your previous training and how you get into consulting your current role, that would be great.
Yeah, happy to do that. Well, thank you, Kwang, again, for inviting me to join this panel today. Really happy to be here and share my experience from consulting and also the journey from PhD to consulting. So let me start with my, background training. So as Kwang mentioned, I'm a scientist by training. I got my PhD from MIT in the field of biological engineering. So maybe a little bit different from Bhavna. I never really thought that I would be a PI at the beginning, but I knew that I'm interested in science, but I know that maybe going down the academia path isn't what I really want to do. And I started to think about other opportunities. I think about the industry opportunities and thinking about consulting opportunities. And I think consulting is a very unique opportunity where that you get to expose with a lot of different latest trends instead of really narrowly focus on one particular area. So I think that's one of the draw me to consulting. And I'm happy to talk about how I made that decision later on. But yeah, like Bhavna, I've done several consulting competition or small consulting projects during my PhD to really understand what that is about before really diving into this industry. And I started at a different consulting firm before I officially joined Health Advances about 2 years ago. And Health Advances, kind of like the other two consulting firms, we do a lot of market research as well as strategy thinking about the implication behind the market research. So really helping our clients to understand what is the unmet need out there, how can we position our products, or how can we make sure that we have commercial success, et cetera, et cetera. And I have worked on all pillars of what my company offers. So from biopharma to medical devices to digital health to diagnostics. So across the different pillars of the life science industry. And I'm happy to talk about it a little bit later. And it has been really a rewarding experience. You really get to learn a lot in a short time. And again, I'm happy to dive into that a little bit more detail later. We are also actively recruiting, so I'm happy to answer any questions about the company, share my experience, and if you want to connect afterwards, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, Stephen. Sounds like all three companies are actively recruiting, so I think that probably be a good networking opportunity for everyone. Okay, and the rest of the panel, I'm gonna ask questions and feel free to jump in whenever you feel like you have a good answer, or skip if you don't feel like you want to answer that question. And okay, so I think for this audience, first maybe we can understand a little bit about what do you generally deliver on your job and what's your day-to-day like, right? So just to make an analogy, for most PhDs, the objective is to finish or complete research projects that maybe lead to some kind of knowledge or product, and the day-to-day is doing some kind of experiments, right? So how would you describe that for your current job?
I'm happy to start. I think similar to PhD aspect, you are answering a question. And in our case, it's a question that our client poses. So the first thing is really understand what is the issue that the client facing. And different from PhD, I guess, our questions are usually more business focused, like trying to understand how do we solve a business problems. And we usually have a very specific timeline, much shorter timeline compared to PhD where you have years to answer a question. Here we have months, if not weeks. So you really need to think about how to prioritize and how to get to the really essential points to answer that question. And in terms of the day-to-day, for me, it really depends on what phase of the project that you're in. So at the beginning, you're thinking about understanding the question, understanding the landscape, and understanding what kind of question you need to ask your experts, such as your physicians, your payers, that will be an insurance company, and patients, for example. So really understand what will be the relevant questions, and then during the middle part of the project, then you'll be talking to the experts that you want to talk to, understand how their insights support or disprove your hypothesis, and then towards the end of the project, really synthesize that in a way that you can explain the story to the client. So I think that is usually the deliverable format, and I'm sure our other panelists have a lot of more insights to add to that.
Yeah, I think I can follow up a little bit, elaborate on the process of market research, because I certainly didn't know how market research was conducted before I joined the company. So typically you start off with like the proposal stages, which probably includes like a PowerPoint deck where you show the client what you can do, and then it goes into sort of contracting. And then let's say if you get the job, then you start off by designing, whether it's survey instruments or a discussion guide or something, depending on if it's qualitative or quantitative. You would be recruiting some of these respondents. So that's, you have to manage your recruiting partners. You have to manage maybe a moderator, stuff like that. Then, you would have to either conduct the interviews or field the surveys and, collect that data, right? And then after you collect the data, obviously you analyze the data, and then you ultimately, at least in my experience, you put it into a PowerPoint deck. You synthesize all the implications, all the findings, and come up with several recommendations for the client. And then everything is put into a PowerPoint deck in which you either present to the client or you just send to the client as a deliverable.
Yeah, I wanted to just chime in and add that it's oh, sorry, are you done, Jeff? I just want to make sure.
Oh, no, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just wanted to add that it really is tailored to the needs of the client and the project. And what I mean by that is when I say tailored to the needs of the client, there's of course the final deliverable that Jeff and Stephen mentioned. A lot of times it's in the format of a PowerPoint. But then of course the client may also want interim deliverables, and it could be because they have an investor presentation coming up or an internal, team meeting where they need to present like what has their market research or strategy involvement with Kantar led to so far. So a lot of times we help with whatever our client needs in the middle of the project as well. And then I would say that the content, of course, of the deliverable really varies depending on the type of the project, which is if it's qualitative versus quantitative, which Jeff went into a little bit, depending on whether it's like a physician survey that you're fielding. It could, the client could just request, I just want all the data in an Excel file, and then give me just, a 4 or 5 slide executive summary of the main points. It could be that. It could be a project where I did for a client where they just wanted a deep dive into prostate cancer treatment. And they wanted us to give them a landscape assessment of how is it currently treated, what are the treatments that are coming up, and how is that going to disrupt the market. So it was like, 100 slide deck, but it really needs to be thought out in the form of a story so that it can be, not only are we presenting it to the client, but that's something that they're using as an educational tool within the company to train new people that are part of, let's say, their prostate cancer team. So again, it's hard to say what exactly the deliverable looks like. Of course, it's the content depends on the need of the client, but usually it's in the form of either a PowerPoint supplemented with an Excel file or something, of course, organized to the T to be able to present to a client. And then the day-to-day is a bit hard, I would say, for me to say, because at any given time I'm juggling multiple projects. So it just depends on the set of projects that I'm working on, but it could be anywhere from me interviewing physicians for a qualitative project to Kantar is unique in that we also have an oncology database that we work on. So sometimes I'll be writing reports on which involve commentary on drug development that's happening in a specific space. So it's kind of just interspersed. Like I said, it's a little bit hard to explain. And then sometimes I'll be in one part of the day I'll be working on a proposal for a client. So and actually that's what's exciting to me, that the day-to-day is not set in stone. It's not like there's always something exciting and new to look forward to. So I'll stop there.
Actually, if I could just add one more thing, I think in my experience, the type of projects that you get is really dependent on the product life cycle. Whether let's say the client's drug is in research stages, maybe you'll do some market landscape work. And then if it's in pre-launch stages, maybe you would do some launch preparedness, kind of projects like messaging or concept testing, things like that. After the product is launched, maybe you would do some kind of an awareness trial usage tracker just to monitor how the market is doing. And then, and so it really depends on, so our clients' needs depends on where in the product's life cycle they're in. And obviously, because we have different clients that have different products and different product life cycles, we're always exposed to we're always doing different projects in one time.
Right. Yeah, thank you all three. And sounds like that's a really good mix of intellectual challenges. And so, in light of that, what do you think was a key strength that you accumulated in your previous training? I guess for Bhavna and Stephen as a scientist, and for Jeff in your undergrad training that you think has really prepared you well for a job and you really get to leverage on?
I can start again, I guess. I would say one key strength I found from my training is that I really understand scientific data. So even though you might think that consulting, we are focusing on business problems, at the end of the day, these are life science products. So we really need to dig into the science, understand what does the clinical trial say, when you're looking at in the early stage of a pharmaceutical development, like you're trying to understand how we should best develop a product. So we need to look at analog drugs, understand how they develop their product, understand their clinical trial results, whether physicians think they're promising or not. So really understand scientific data. I think I found that to be very useful in my job.
Yeah, I can chime in and say that communicating complex topics and putting it to a variety of audiences that may or may not know the depth of your subject is a big thing that I learned in my PhD, where, even though every time my PI was like, sign up for this journal club or present here, I'd be like, oh, I'm not sure I want to. But honestly, it turned out to be the best training in doing that. Like, for example, in my PhD, I would be presenting research to other cancer biologists, or sometimes in a developmental biology forum, or and so to tailor your presentation to the audience, and then making it as detail or not detail oriented. Yeah, so essentially I would summarize it as being able to communicate science or any complex topic, knowing that not every audience member is going to be at the same level, is something that I really value from my research. The other thing is, the good thing about academia is that it does get you to really become detail oriented. So it can be a plus and a minus in consulting, I feel like. I am very detail oriented, and I like to dig deep into a topic. But at the same time, I think the challenge in consulting is to dial back and always remind yourself, is this level of depth really needed for the client? Sometimes the answer is yes, and that's what they appreciate you for. And that's what they have, signed on the specific company that you're part of for. But sometimes it's more than is required of your time. So I would say that that is a skill that I appreciate, but I've also needed to learn to what extent it is required, on a custom basis, I would say.
And then for me, I think instead of depth, I think my training gave me a lot of breadth. I obviously didn't have such deep science training, but I did have some business training, which trained me to think of the bigger picture, think of what is it, how does it affect, for example, the business as a whole? Because after you collect all the data, the scientific data, as Stephen mentioned, you would have to, in a sense, like analyze them and develop some implications and recommendations. And I think that strategic thinking was really developed during my my training. So yeah, I think that helped me in that respect. And I was also able to thankfully catch up to some of the scientific knowledge that I need to know in my work. So worked out.
Yeah, that's very helpful, and I think we have audience from different kinds of backgrounds. So I think it's very important for us to hear from different perspectives. So I think then on the other side, right? As scientists, we all gone through different kind of training, but focus on certain things. So what do you feel like typical scientists lack for in the consulting career? And Jeff, for a typical undergrad lack in the consulting career that you wish you accumulated more, or like how can people build up to accumulate that skill that may be needed?
Maybe I can start.
And that's actually in line with Ray Chen's audience question I just noticed. So he or she asked that the essential characteristic of being a consultant too.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I can chime in. I have an initial thought, and then maybe I'll circle back. But for me, it kind of goes back to that communication. Even though I said that is a key strength of mine that from my past training that helped. Yes, communicating complex topics, making it easy is one thing which we learn in our PhD. But at the same time, I feel like business communication is so different. In academia, it's kind of, storytelling. In business, it's also storytelling, but the client doesn't have time to, get through all of your data and then be like, okay, what is the recommendation? Instead, for me, I think the training that I was lacking was, get to the point first and then ask like how much detail the client wants and then deliver the rest accordingly. So I would say learning how to write and communicate for a business audience is something that, of course, in our academic training, we don't directly get. Yeah, and I'm sure I can think of more, but I'll stop here for now.
Yeah, two things come to my mind at the moment. The first thing, kind of Bhavna has already mentioned, is more about how to know how much detail you need to dig and really focus on what we call 80-20. How do you spend 20% of your time to get to 80% of that answer? As scientists, we are trained to exhaust all possibilities, and that's what PhD is about, right? You're proving that there's no other way that your hypothesis can be wrong. But then we don't have that luxury in consulting. So really need to know how to focus. I think that is somewhat a different mindset. So that's the first thing. And the second, I would say, is, at least for my PhD experience, I'm mostly working alone. Like, I will have collaboration with other people, but I'm owning my project. I know what's going on with my project, and day to day, I am kind of responsible for the work that I'm doing. But in consulting, there's a lot of collaboration. You're not going to be able to handle every aspect of the work yourself. So really, how to understand how to communicate. Again, communicate with a team, communicate with your project manager, setting expectation. I think that is very important in the consulting world. And I'm sure some of you have this training already, but we expect to like pick this up and really know how to collaborate and communicate with your team. That's very important.
Yeah, no, I agree with the above. Although I don't have a PhD degree, I can speak to my experience in my undergraduate degree. I think something that was very important that I had to develop a lot was just because we get so much, because work comes in very short successions, you know, as Stephen mentioned, our projects are very short. You have to deliver a lot of things that has to be, you know, I want to say like close to perfect. You know, you don't have much room for errors, or, you know, you have to be very detail oriented. And so I remember when I was in my undergraduate degree, like I can get something to 90% correct and I can get an A. But in the consulting world, like you almost shouldn't have any mistakes. And so I think that was something that I need to get used to. It's also like an attitude thing. You know, I have to make sure that every little piece of the work is of high quality. And I think that it's more of a mindset thing than it's a skill thing. Like, I'm sure everybody can pick these up, but it's you know, you have to be, or at least I was advised to be detail oriented and careful in everything that I do. I think that was something that I learned.
Very interesting. Different perspective.
Is it okay if I jump in and add one more thing?
Please do.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to say that for me, something that was challenging and very, very new was being on more of the client-facing side. Definitely not something that I got trained in during my PhD. And I would say it's a training in getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, which is just not knowing all the answers, and that's okay. And I think, you know, Stephen kind of touched upon this by saying that we are a lot of times, I mean, especially in the halfway through or past that point in our training, and whether it's PhD or any kind of grad school, we're very much, you know, knowledgeable about our project, probably more than our committee members or anyone else in the room. But for me to really feel okay with not knowing all aspects of the business, but still learning how to represent myself as part of this team and as a company, and learning to have those kind of nuanced conversations about projects that I may not have taken part in, but have just heard from colleagues what goes into it. So, and I would say that to bridge that gap, I did try to shadow a lot of people who would do those client-facing roles initially, and then have those discussions with colleagues about projects that I haven't yet worked on, so that I can become knowledgeable. But at the end of the day, like I said, you're not going to have all the answers. So that kind of, again, going back to communication, learning and being okay with telling your client, you know, that's a great question. I feel like our PhDs do that in journal clubs. That's a great question, and that's something that I will get back to you with an answer, and that's absolutely fine. But it took a little bit of getting used to for me to learn how to represent my company. So just wanted to add that.
Very interesting perspective. And we see audience already asking questions. If you have questions, feel free to pop up in chat. We'll incorporate along the way. So many of you actually have mentioned that you already started some consulting experience prior. So I'm just wondering, how does that play into your current role, and maybe go into a little bit on recruiting process? I think many people on the call may be interested in pursuing a career in consulting and maybe connecting with you guys later even. But what's the recruiting process like, and what makes you stand out, and what are the key experience beforehand for you?
Maybe I can start this time. So by the way, I didn't say this yet, but yes, my company is also very actively recruiting. So I'm very happy to connect with anybody who's interested. Our recruiting process is I would say it's fairly typical. You know, you have maybe several phone interviews, phone screens, where they would ask you some mostly behavioral or fit questions. You know, maybe understanding your experience, in whether in the medical field or in market research or in consulting. Our company, we see ourselves as the intersection between these three things. So having experience in any one of these three fields would be very beneficial. And then after a few phone screens, you would ultimately have to do a case interview, in which you would be given a business question and some data. And this will be the kind of questions that we answer on a daily basis. And you would have to, we're testing you on your ability to analyze and synthesize all this information into for example, PowerPoint deck. You will present this PowerPoint deck to a bunch of our colleagues, and then we sort of go from there. And so I think key skills needed for this whole recruitment process is, first you have to be able to articulate your past experiences, and really tie your past experiences to how it will benefit the role that you're applying to. And then, of course, your ability to analyze qualitative and quantitative data and synthesize them in a way that, it makes it easy for me to understand. So that's one of the things, right? You have so much data lying around. Like, how do you, repackage it in a way that is like in a story form, like Bhavna said, and also so that you can, this is the phrase that we use, you have to chew the food and give it to us. Like, don't make us chew the food. You should chew the food and give it to us. And so I can understand it much easier. I don't have to, I have minimal thinking that needs to do to understand what you're trying to say in this presentation.
Yeah, along the same line. So basically how I prepared, I'm sure a lot of you might have known, like, consulting interview, there is a pretty quote unquote standard format, right? And there's always the fit part, like trying to understand why you are interested in consulting, and then the case interview part, like giving you a case, understand how your ability to synthesize information and communicate the result. So thinking about along that line, how I came down with my journey, I think as a PhD student, you don't necessarily have the ability to demonstrate that you have interest in consulting. So really jumping on to like case, I would say case competitions, that's one great way to demonstrate that you have an interest in this path. So set you up and to show that you understand what consulting is about, and also you demonstrate that you are interested in this career path. So that's kind of a more deliberate decision on my side, like trying to seek out those opportunities and really understand what consulting is about, so that I can demonstrate on my resume, as well as talk to my recruiter during my interview process. So that's kind of how I started. And in terms of interview preparation, I would really encourage people to learn a little bit more about what case interview is about and practice. I think you're not going to be able to anticipate what case you'll be given, but you can anticipate how you're going to answer questions. I think that's the most important part, like trying to understand how to answer a question in a very limited amount of time in a way that your interviewer will be convinced that you have the skills. I think that's the most important part.
Yeah, I'm just going to add more to what they said. So everything that they said and what I'm about to say, which is, I would also say in the interview process, it's really important to show that you are specifically interested in this company as well, and why. And one way you can do that is, just reaching out to people through LinkedIn or maybe common connections who have worked at that company or are currently working at that company, just to have an informational interview and understand, why did you join? What do you like about it? And it's not just to have an answer for the interview. It's really for you also to see if you can fit into that culture. So I think that's a very important kind of preparation to do, even for yourself, to be able to see if you can see yourself as part of the company. And then, yeah, overall, what makes you stand out? I think it's different for different companies. I would say that for life sciences or healthcare consulting companies, I was worried, like, do I have to have a business background, or do I need to know all these like fancy, business terminology? But honestly, what they're looking for, at least I can only speak for life sciences consulting companies in general, is somebody who's interested and like Steven said, knows a little bit about what they're getting into when we say consulting. It's great to have prior consulting experience if you have some, so you can talk about those particular examples, especially in fit interviews when they'll ask you questions like, tell us about a time when you worked in a team or led a team. If you do share about like, oh yeah, this time I was consulting, and then, go with that, that's a way to kind of drop in that, you have that consulting experience, of course. But I think at the end of the day, they're looking for scientists who are trained to critically think and are excited about diving deep into a question and being able to work in a fast-paced environment. And of course can collaborate. All of those things we are trained in during our, any academia training, including undergrad or master's, of course, in our PhD. So if you're worried, like, oh, I don't have consulting experience, what should I do? If you have the opportunity at your university, seek that out. If you can do, some consulting club, or even reach out to people in your network and see if you can do some pro bono consulting work for them. But, if you don't have that opportunity and you're actively looking right now, no worries. I mean, just try to stand out as someone who can really communicate, and then everything else that I already said. So I'll pause there.
Actually, if I can add just one small thing, I think for our company, for example, you don't need to have consulting experience, but it's really at the case interview where they will test if you can think structurally and communicate structurally, which is basically the skill that they're looking for in your previous consulting experiences. So if you don't have that, then you can prove yourself in that case interview, I think.
I see. And actually that echoes with the Ryan's question. He's working about startup and he's looking to shift into consulting. You have already, all three of you have provided great advice. So maybe actually you can elaborate a little bit. How do people prepare for these kind of case interviews?
Yeah, I can start again. So there are, I think online, there are a bunch of these websites which provide free case questions or cases, which you can, obviously just read them. You can get a friend or somebody else to case, as a verb, case you. So putting yourself in that environment, pretending that you're actually in an interview, and see how you how you do. And I think it's what I like to do is, like, I record myself and I listen to how I do the case. And when I do that, I'm able to pick up a lot of things that I should have done better here, there. I should have said this instead of that. So I think and also in addition to practicing a lot, I think you should try to get someone who is good at this and listen to how they do a case. Because casing is really, I would say it's more of an art than a science. Everyone does it in a slightly different way, and so finding someone who is good at it, really gets you a long way.
Yeah, I was saying during my preparation, many schools have consulting clubs. So in addition to an online platform, you can also seek out whether or not your school has a consulting club, whether or not there are people who are also looking to join this path. So they are also looking for a case partner to practice with. I would definitely echo what Jeff said. I think practice is very important. Reading the case material, you can say, oh, that makes sense. I can say that. But when you're actually in the environment, like trying to say it out loud, that's completely different in my experience. So really you need to find a partner, actively practice it with them, and give each other critical, say constructive feedback. Like, this is what I think you did well. This is what I think you can do better. And having someone who have the experience to like show you what people are looking for, I think that would also be very important as well. And that would really benefit you a lot.
Yeah, I can add here. Kantar Health is a little bit different in their interview process in that they don't do what I would call a traditional case interview where, I think you can sometimes have like 3 to 4 cases back to back with different people at the company. But in Kantar Health, there's 3 rounds of interview. The first is just a fit interview, and kind of like more behavioral interview questions, and both parties assessing their fit in the team. The second interview is actually them providing you a sort of a PowerPoint or a presentation that they've done, and stripping it of all the content, and then you come up with the content based on the data that's provided. So that's an exercise in really, Kantar being able to see if you can write those kind of insight-driven deliverables and how your written communication of that business side of things is. And then the third round is actually more presentation-based, how you're actually communicating the research. And one thing that we do a lot in our work is someone may have put together a deliverable, and then I may have to jump in and present it, or not necessarily deliverable. I think in most cases the team members do it, but it could be an example of a report on a treatment landscape that maybe I put together, but a colleague has to step in and present it to a different client. And so in that case, that's what that third interview tests, which is how comfortable are you in preparing to present someone else's work. So it kind of tests a lot of things at once. It's your presentation skills, but also, that what preparation you put into it, and then how you actually handle the questions on a work that's not exactly yours. So, but of course, to the client, you have to come across that, you did that. So, I would say that Kantar Health is a little bit different in their interview style compared to other consulting companies. But for me as a candidate, it was really good to see what kinds of, work challenges to expect. And I think that's their whole point of giving interview phases or presenting it in a way that both parties have an understanding of how the candidate can perform some of the basic tasks of the job. And so, so I would say mine was very different, but most life sciences consulting companies do have the traditional case type that Jeff and Stephen were talking about.
Thanks for the solid advice for preparing for interview. And so shall we from the audience, I guess, ask this question that's a slightly step back, considering moving into potentially different career. And so he or she was interested that, for scientists who are interested in the business side of life sciences, there are multiple entry points to consider. So there are consulting companies, in-house consulting, there are investment banking, there's business development in biopharma. What do you think is unique about the training in consulting? And what do you think were the pros and cons for young graduates that they can consider?
I can try to start. I don't think I have insights into all of those fields. I think I can speak to consulting companies, in-house consulting. I think I know what you're talking about. And investment banking, I do have some friends in healthcare investment banking, so I can speak to those. I think in general, consulting companies, and in my mind, in-house consulting companies are doing very similar things. So we're helping clients in doing, for example, market research, whereas an in-house consulting, to my understanding, they are also doing market research, but for their own for their company. The nature of work, I think, is similar. Obviously, then the training will be similar, but I think in a consulting company, you will typically be faster paced, is what I've heard. There are more, you have different clients, so you have more work coming in as opposed to an in-house consultant where there might be less. And then investment banking is a completely different beast. You're looking at M&A, like mergers and acquisitions, and like how to, seal the deal, how to like do due diligence and how to seal the deal. And so in that respect, I think it's very different, and it trains you more on the financial aspect of it and modeling and stuff like that, I think.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that, I guess. For my company, actually, we do quite a lot of due diligence for M&As. So with that aspect, yes, we also, first of all, understanding what is their target business model, like understanding whether or not their forecast really makes sense. So that will involve building some modeling, doing some market research. So with that regard, we obviously don't do the whole part of investment banking, what they do, but we do touch on some of that aspect, like trying to build some financial models, understanding whether or not their the targets is really a business that's worth buying. So we do some of that. In terms of the pros and cons of, I guess, consulting, I would say that the pros, as Jeff had mentioned, is a fast-paced environment. So you really get to expose to many different industries in a very short period of time. You really get to touch on many different stages of the life science industry, life science life cycle. So from the beginning of assets to middle to once a product is launched, like they are facing different problems. And by doing different projects, you get to expose with that experience in a very short period of amount of time. So I think that's a pro side. And that can also be a con side. Like we really need to pick up a lot of different things in a short period of time. So the learning curve is definitely very steep. But if you have the courage, if you find that it's exciting, I would encourage you to explore consulting.
Just to add to what Stephen and Jeff said, consulting is a good stepping stone to any of these roles as well. I'm not sure if, investment banking or, in-house pharma consulting take on younger graduates. So actually consulting could be a route through which, you could get some of that experience. You could get some, market research or client facing, any kind of training that is required to be in these future roles. So I would maybe even look at, if your end goal is investment banking or even being part of a VC that funds biotechs, you can see consulting as an initial path where you get the training that's needed to go into any of these. And then the other thing is I have seen people that would start in consulting and form connections with pharma companies through either their custom engagements or business development type of activities in their role, and that can often lead to future opportunities. So so I would say that it can almost be kind of a path that you take in your career trajectory.
Let me just add a little bit more on top of everything that was said. I agree with all of those. And also, I think there was something that we didn't really talk about, which is you're probably going to be making the most money in investment banking, but you're probably also going to be working in the longest hours. And then maybe after that, maybe consulting companies, and then after that, in-house consulting is my impression of these professions. And by making a lot of money, I think you'll be talking about maybe for investment banking, I don't know, like you're starting at over 100K maybe, but you're also working over, I don't know, 60, 70 hours, something like that, 60, 70 hours, something like that. And then it kind of goes down hill from there.
Yeah, any money more than 50K is a lot for a PhD. You don't care about money in academia. So I guess, and people actually, thanks for everyone who's for sharing different kind of PhD consulting groups and consulting opportunities. So since Xiaoyu asked about, the career trajectory, how do you see your current career projection and what do you hope to achieve in your career? Sorry, this is a little bit of a tough question, but I figure it might be a good place to towards the end.
Yeah, I can talk about career progression first. So I think it's pretty common that in our company, you would either join as an associate or a senior associate, and maybe after, I would say, 2 years or so, then you would be promoted to the next position. You start from associate, senior associate, then manager, then associate director, and you work your way up that way. I would say if you do good work, you get promoted pretty quickly. And so, there's nothing stopping you from earning more money or, going up the ladders. For myself, I don't really know my, I guess, long-term plan, but I think my short-term plan is to stay and to hopefully get some more managerial experience in my current role.
Yeah, I would say the same for me. I think it was really hard for me to know like what exactly on long term I'm going to do. It really depends on how this current role pans out. And at least for the short term, as Jeff said, I think really as you start, you are a team member. You're working on like actually doing the research and supporting your team to come up with a deliverable. But I do hope to, like, once I get more experience and once I kind of go up the ladder, be more on the manager side, like understanding how to run a team, understand how to manage a team, both manage up and manage down in order to effectively lead the project. And I think that will be a very important skill no matter what career path you choose later on. So at least that's my short-term goal for now.
And yeah, I kind of echo what both of them said. It's really hard to think about, long-term goals. And yeah, I'm still very much, growing in my current role and enjoying it. And for me too, an important kind of next step in my career growth is to get to that managerial role where I can not only, manage my own time and accomplish what I want to and continue to learn still different aspects of the business, but also, yeah, managing a team and a project. So.
Okay, and lastly, a quick one-sentence reply to each of these easy questions. So what do you love the most about your current job as a consultant?
I can go. That it's multiple questions. I'm not, worried about like thinking about one question for 6 years, which is what academia is, or more years if you're a PI. So fast-paced questions. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I was kind of said what I said earlier, really learning about different aspects of things. You feel like you're really learning everything. That's one of the things I love the most.
For me, it's looking at the data and see how that could potentially affect a pharmaceutical company as a whole.
Thank you all. So I guess we are almost at time, and I think I want to leave a little time if you're open to it. If you want to share your LinkedIn or email info with the people here, given that your company is recruiting, please do in the chat. I think people are very interested in this group. And in the meantime, I guess at the end, do you guys have anything you want to share, any last message that we didn't cover on for this audience and eventually the audience on YouTube if this is released?
I can start. I think before I guess really look into consulting, I really don't know what it is about. So I would say it's never too late to start, and it's always a good idea to build your network, ask questions, like seeking out these opportunities. I think if you are here, you are doing the right thing. You are trying to understand what consulting is about. So really ask questions, and if you have a friend who is a consultant, ask them what the experience is about, and then decide whether or not that's a right fit for you. Consulting might not be the right fit for everyone, and frankly, there's like some parts of the job that I always think, oh, I feel really challenged every day. Like, is this the right path for me? But if you enjoy it, if you really want to learn more, really talk to the people, understand what the experience is about, and try to, again, seek out opportunities if you can, doing some case competition, doing some mini consulting projects that will really help you understand what this is about.
Yeah, I would totally echo that. And also to talk to many people in, let's say if you're interested in the company, don't just talk to one person because they might have a perspective that other people don't, because sometimes we work in different teams and there are different team dynamics. And so I would suggest if you're actually interested in a particular company, for example, talk to more than one person.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Networking, and never too early to start that. And also, like Steven said, it's never too late to consider this path either. And when you reach out, especially to younger graduates who are just early in their career, we're all very excited to help out. And we were in your seats like not that long ago, so I'm always happy to kind of help, and our experiences are more recent too, so we can relate, we can share a lot of that, and hopefully you can learn from our our mistakes in our journey. So always happy to help.
Yeah, thank you all for the very encouraging message, and I learned a lot too. I think, as Bhavna said, you guys are just right into the experience, and you really have the perspective that I think the people who are stepping into this career or interested in looking into this career can learn a lot from. And thank you all for providing your LinkedIn for people to connect to and for potential networking job opportunities and all the great advices you share. So everyone, let's give a clap or virtual clap to Jeff, Bhavna, and Steven. Thank them for giving us their valuable advice. Thank you all for attending.
Thanks, Quan, for having us.
Thank you, everyone. Hope this is helpful for everyone and really appreciate the opportunity.